Hello, man. I hope you're doing well. I hope during this series you have been enjoying the back corner of my porch, the palm trees, the surfboards. There's a fountain running in the background. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but I'm enjoying it. And I have really been enjoying leading you through this document. Today, we're approaching the end. We're going to start off with point number 3, how fatherhood is essential, and we're going to go right through the end of the document. Here today, we get to the epicenter, the apex, maybe, of the document on how fatherhood is the cornerstone. He says it's essential, the subheading here. So the document's called Into the Breach. What breach? What gap? Ultimately, where we're arriving today, we're talking about that gap between those we encounter and God. Well, what is that gap? It's a gap of fatherlessness. Today, the veil drops, and he shows us how the Father, the human Father, is where we first glimpse our image of the Father in heaven. And there's the breach. We have countless priests, bishops, teachers, presidents, heads of state, people in authority, police officers, and so forth and so on, who are fatherless. And maybe their dad didn't leave them. Maybe they're not. Maybe their mothers aren't widows. Maybe it's a crisis of absentee fathers. Regardless of the source, he's pointing to something critical in our culture that affects our pastoral strategy and evangelization, and certainly our pedagogy, our approach to teaching our own children and passing on the faith. He wants us to have this sensitive understanding of the problem of fatherlessness so that we can face it head on in preparing everyone in our sphere of influence for the battle. Because when we understand the problem, we can approach it better. We can come at it with sensitivity and compassion, and come at the problem, stand in the breach with a more effective and robust strategy. In the second paragraph, he's referring to Ephesians 3:15 about the fatherhood of God. And he says, fathers will perform this task by exercising generous responsibility. I love that phrase, exercising generous responsibility. So that made me think of, what's the opposite of that? The opposite of taking generous responsibility, exercising generous responsibility, is being stingy or possibly blame. Do we take responsibility or do we defer? Do we blame? Maybe even where fault can be appropriately assigned to someone else. Think about the lives of the saints for a moment. Where responsibility could be taken, they took responsibility, even if it wasn't their fault. That runs so against the grain of our culture. So recently in the apartment complex where we live, they've reopened the pool, which is wonderful. And some of the amenities which we agreed to pay for in terms of our lease, are coming back online now. I recently contacted corporate here to let them know, we agreed to pay a sizable lease, because you have a gym and you have a clubhouse and a place for our kids to play and 4 swimming pools and a jacuzzi and so forth, right? Well, none of those things were available shortly after we moved in. And so the point we raised was simply, our value judgment as a family to sign that lease was based on the offerings that are no longer available. Now, I understand you're exercising your due diligence under state mandate. However, there's an opportunity for excellent business here. And of course, I got the corporate blame game in reply. I wasn't expecting much, but I had to try. I wanted to create an opportunity for a business to to rise above. What did they do? They did what most businesses do today. They blamed the state. They said, there's no guarantee in your lease, and then came all the legal language. I said, I understand all that. I was just creating an opportunity for you, and we're disappointed with your response. Well, this is the culture we live in. We hide under liabilities and contracts, and we live in fear of litigation. You can see this in church authorities sometimes too. And this is not the testimony of the lives of the saints. Their testimony is where you can take responsibility, do so, and make yourself a part of the solution with reason as your guide to the common good. And not only the common good in natural law, but the greatest good. How do we do this? How do we exercise generous responsibility as dads? Specifically, he narrows it down in the next line. He says, by a more solicitous commitment to education. A task he shares with his wife, referring to one of the sacred constitutions of Vatican II. But the point here is we don't have to be a biological father. We don't have to be a priest. This is when we assume responsibility and we make a solicitous, a generous, we're generous in taking responsibility, and we make a resolute commitment to educating those under us. And by under, I mean those we have influence over, those we exercise a fatherly authority upon. How do you do that? How do you know who you have a fatherly authority upon? Well, by looking at those who listen to you as a teacher. And thereby we practice a great generosity in our teaching. We make a solicitous commitment to education, but that begins in our home. I love how he starts off early here by saying, all men are called to fatherhood in some way. Whether you're married, a priest, single, lay, professed, and he says, being a father makes us more like God. So immediately I think, how? How does being a father make us more like God? Because by being a dad, we become a visible icon. We become a pointer, a reminder to everyone that they're called, to every man, that they're called to be a father in some way. In the next paragraph, he spells out why this call to fatherhood is so important. And it makes a lot of sense. He says, basically, kids learn about God through their dad. This is not to be an affront to the feminine dignity at all. But the children first glimpse the love of the Father, the first person of the Blessed Trinity, through the image of their dad. So what would Satan's prime attack be? The breakdown of the family. The dissemblance of of father, the dad. He says, we find a primordial rebellion against God's fatherhood. So if we can damage the dignity of the dad, if we can break apart the family, we can destroy the first glimpse the child has of the love of the Father in heaven. It's a good strategy. In the next paragraph, he highlights the strategy straight from hell, encouraging men to flee from this beautiful gift in pursuit of their own desires. There it is. Be selfless in your commitment to give life, to take responsibility, and to educate. Or, on the other hand, to pursue your own desires. Man, he's smart. Here in our culture, Satan is able to set up this false dichotomy where he juxtaposes commitment to giving life against fulfillment of desire. When the reality we know is that when we give ourselves away, we're truly free and more full of joy. And our heart's deepest desire is met. But Satan confuses and conflates the matter with a half-truth and makes it look like self-donation leads to misery because it means less hedonism. In the next paragraph, he says, Catholic men also contribute far too regularly to the same scandal that devastates the heart of a child. I started reflecting on my own life here, I don't know about you, and makes too many women in our culture live as if they were widows. The question this begs is, what do I do to make my wife live as a widow? Now, I mean, I'm still alive, I'm trying to be healthy, And but I'm really pointing at absenteeism. How do I make myself unavailable? We have subtle ways of doing that, don't we? Now, sometimes distance and space for work or prayer or concentration is good, right? That's all part of normal, healthy family boundaries. But the cult of fatherhood, the cult of the family is selfless sacrifice. That is the first language, and everything else comes second. So other than leaving and pursuing our own desires, what might be other ways we might fall short, forcing our wives to live as if they were widows? What are some other examples? Think about that, of absenteeism. That might take a moment of self-reflection. When this happens later on down, reflecting on Sirach 35, he says, they have lost their protectors and providers, ! There's an unnatural void, I underline. There is an unnatural void of the one called upon by God. Here, right here, this is the role of the dad that's so often missing. To ensure the harmonious and united development of all the members of the family. If you ever find yourself wondering, what does it mean to be dad? What should I be doing? We all have those moments where we get too busy, we get lost in ambition or work or stress, and it's like, what's it all about? Boom, here it is. It's moments like this, this little bit of clarity, right? Our job to ensure the harmonious and united development of all the members of the family. Beautiful. Next paragraph, he says, don't be fooled by those voices in the culture, the feminists, the modernists, who all want to erase distinctions between mothers and fathers, ignoring the complementarity that's inherent in creation itself. Beautifully put. Further on down, a father's role as spiritual head must never be understood as domination. Boy, that's potent, worthy of reflection. So how do we lead, be strong, without dominating? What's that line in the sand? That's a discussion point for you. What is that line? And what is strong leadership without domination? What's the distinction? So moving on down, he says, our fatherhood reflects imperfectly, but surely, the fatherhood of God. So my question to you is this. Describe the fatherhood of God. Take time right now to list 5 attributes of the fatherhood of God. Because if it's our job to be the initial image for our children and those we influence, our biological children, our spiritual children, if you will, our grandchildren, those who come underneath us as students of life, if it's our job to be that primordial image of the Father in heaven, then we've got to know who that is. Like, we're supposed to be pointing to him. We should have these sobering moments where we go, that's what the Father in heaven looks like. This is what my fatherhood looks like. There's a gap there. But that allows us to get specific when we have that image, that goal, when we have that growth plan. And that's what I'm aiming at here is, let's look at the gap and not just say, oh yeah, those would be good goals. But no, let's say, I'm going to grow in these ways. These are 5 ways I understand, know, have experienced the fatherhood of God. And see, that's a reflection we can bring out on a daily basis. We can look at ourselves during our nightly examine and say, I need to grow here tomorrow. I'm going to grow here tomorrow. This is how the Father loves. This is what I did today. So we have an act of contrition to say, oh my God, I'm sorry, I've offended you. But then we have the Beatitudes. Then this is where our growth plan can come in. And we can look at the excellence and the perfection of the fatherhood of God. And we can look at ours that fall short, as good as it may be in certain areas, and be honest, be sober, and say, here's my growth plan. I want to love my children and those under my influence like the Father in heaven, so that when they remember me and I am gone, I am an effective icon throughout their life and in their living memory of the fatherhood of God. That's my legacy. So take a moment and list 5 attributes of the Father in heaven. Think of it often. Bring it back up. Use it for prayer. Because that's what you're pointing to. In the next paragraph, he's pointing to Pope Francis, who says that we need to feel the joy of fatherhood. Moving out one's vocation to fatherhood, it's absolutely essential for a man to live out this fullness, to find the meaning of his life. I would say, to the degree that you give life, is the degree that you experience fulfillment. So whether biological father, priest, layperson, we are going to feel like our life is full. We're going to feel like we've met our purpose to the degree that we give life, that we give. So if you're ever counseling someone who feels stuck, who feels unfulfilled, the greatest pastoral strategy is find ways for them to give. Just look, help them look, stand beside your brother and say, let's look at your life. Where is service? Where's service to your family? Where's service to your church? Because in that lies fulfillment and joy. In the next paragraph, to fully live, he says, moving on down, God has a plan for you. If you don't embrace this fatherly, this spousal vocation, you'll be stuck in the, listen to this, impotence of the seed that refuses to die and refuses to give life. I prayed on that one for a while. Don't settle for this half-life. A physics term, a chemistry term. I love the next section on grandfathers, but I'm going to let you read that and skip on down to the next paragraph. And now he's talking to people who've suffered because of absence of a father figure. Or maybe they're there, but they stay distant, emotionally distant. Halfway down this paragraph, he says something so crucial. If you have not already done so, allow Christ to guide you in order to see your father as he sees him. So here he's talking about generational healing and stopping the legacy of hate and hurt. So to the degree that we're unhealed, he's saying, hey, let's get some help. Let's get a counselor, a spiritual director. Let's talk it out. Let's let the Lord into our heart to heal the memory of our father so that we don't hand on that hurt to our own kids. Beautiful. A painful memory of our own dad. I know I can relate to that. My dad was an alcoholic. If I don't get that memory healed and I don't come to Jesus in that, that can limit my own ascent in holiness. That can seriously impede my ability to stand in the breach and point, to be a living pointer to the love of the Father, because I'm stuck in my hurt from my own dad. In the conclusion, he talks about this relationship of my namesake, St. Gregory of Nazianzen, and St. Basil. He talks about this brotherhood, and he spells it out. He's like inspiring us, encouraging us to have this kind of brotherhood. He says, they were a rule and standard for each other, by which they learned the distinction between what was right and what was not. I love that. Their friendship inspired each to grow in virtue and freedom, to be less concerned for self and more eager to place his life at the service of others. There it is. They encouraged each other to be a gift to the other. What a great definition. What a great image of friendship, of fraternal love. This is, of course, what we're called to be for each other, and I see it as a cornerstone of our community, our discussion, our friendship, and I exhort you to branch out of this group, to use that as the icon, to find more brothers who can encourage you in that way. In the next paragraph, I love how he says, our life in Christ is not of do's and don'ts, but an adventure in authentic freedom. That's that same freedom I was talking about earlier, how Satan juxtaposes freedom and autonomy, and he makes it look like it's something that it's not, with a half-truth. Embrace that freedom, he says, in order to place your life, what? At the service of Christ, beginning in your home and radiating out into the world. I thought that was such a poetic and beautiful and fitting ending, a way of describing our focus, our duty, our obligation. It starts in our home and radiates out from there. So brothers, let's take time to pray now that we'll be better icons, better lovers, and that we may inspire our kids and all those we influence to dive deeper into the love of the Father. This has been a privilege to lead you through this document. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the videos, to chime in, to share your thoughts and reflections, and I look forward to whatever God has in store next. Peace.